Okay, finally concluded RIL's 44th AGM speech. Let me take it across to our experts. We've got a battery of them to analyze the important announcements being made at Reliance's 44th AGM. By the way, before anything else, the stock has managed to close at the lows of the day. Had Reliance participated, perhaps the Nifty could have made a dash and an attempt at clawing back to the recent highs, but couldn't quite do that. Reliance has managed to close at the session lows. It's a 2.6% cut that you've closed the day with on Reliance futures, which have shut shop at 21.51, the biggest drag on the Nifty today. That said, a lot of announcements being made. Perhaps the market is going to digest all of them tomorrow, and that's perhaps when we're going to see a positive reaction coming in. But first, before I take it across to my experts, let me take it across to my colleague Ajay Sharma, who's tracked many RIL AGMs. Ajay, to your mind, what were the top 5 things that stood out from the AGM, which shareholders and the markets are going to take cognizance of?
Good afternoon, Aisha. It was clearly, in my view, one of the historic AGMs from Reliance Industries. And as somebody was just talking to me a while back, every 10, 15 years, 10, 12 years, Reliance manages to transform its business model. And as Mukesh Ambani was still talking about, it started off as a textile company. Last few years belonged to technology and e-commerce. The next few years, a new chapter is being opened up for Reliance Industries' business model, and clearly it reads green. And clearly, I mean, I won't go into the details, but green energy and this entire new complex at Jamnagar, the 5,000-acre, 4 gigafactories. I mean, I've seen Reliance trade in the first 7, 8, 10 years of my tracking it in 10 to 12 times forward earnings. The moment technology got introduced in their business model, the entire valuation expanded to, around 20 times. The way they are going in the direction of green energy, solar, voltaic, and hydrogen fuel, I won't be surprised as more, data flows in and how they are achieving those plans. The multiple on which Reliance trades at will start expanding soon. We have already seen how the world values, green energy and the Teslas of the world. And so that was a bit of a detailing, the 60,000 crore capex, all of that detailing was clearly a positive. Stock had run up quite a lot, so some profit taking is not ruled out. But everything else around low cost phone, Geo, etc., came on expected lines. But the green roadmap clearly was quite interesting.
Indeed. So let me take it across to our experts, a slew of them joining in on the show today. We've got Devin Choksi, we've got Nitin Soni as well joining in on the show. Devin, if I could start the discussion firstly with you, considering you're as well an old-timer tracking Reliance, what to your mind stood out? And quite a few historic announcements made. Then why the lukewarm response on the stock? It's closed at the session lows today.
Yes, good afternoon, Aisha. Well, I think in a simple answer, I think to the last point which you raised, I think today being the expiry date, probably I think you can probably find that the traders would enter into the market tomorrow. So I think we'll leave that thing for tomorrow. Now, I think an extraordinary amount of vision that the company has demonstrated by putting across, I think, the 4 gigafactories on the roadmap and committing 60,000 crores worth of investment in 3 to 4 years' time. Along with, I think, if investments coming in from the material supply factories, I think which would be additional 15,000 crore. So totally 75,000 crore worth of investment roadmap has been set for next 3 to 4 years. This to me, I think, is extremely fundamental because if you look at, I think, current year likely to be a situation of around 1,25,000 crore worth of EBITDA that the company would be contributing. On that EBITDA, and next year I think going forward, I think it could be somewhere between 125 to 150. On that EBITDA, I think if you say the amount of money that the company is generating from its existing businesses, we're talking about 75,000 crore worth of investment 3 to 4 years time is extremely possible to manage. So that is the first important point. And I think they've covered the entire universe of the green energy system, be it into the solar, be it into the storage, be it into the fuel cell technology and electrolyzers, I think, which are required. So from all perspectives, if you look at it, I think this is a comprehensive way of, I think, looking at the entire business. And as Ajay was mentioning, I think maybe an eye should be kept on, I think, the valuations. This kind of businesses could probably easily fetch you a valuation of around 10 to 15 times EV to EBITDA on a conservative basis. Maybe I think more than that. But at this point of time, we'll not talk about it. Let them execute. I would think that this is a key important announcement. The second most important part, I think, which I see is everybody was counting Saudi Aramco. I think that part is getting cleared. But most importantly, I think the issue is about the Saudi Aramco relationship is taking the company to the next level into the world market. So from classic refining business to going into, I think, a specialty chemicals and new material business is something which I think the company has started working. And they are trying to put across, I think, all the material blocks available to the rest of the people in the world. So in a way, I think this is going to be a complete transition from fossil fuel business. So this is again very important. Why this is important? Most of the ESG funds in the world, they would look at companies for investment. I think when they start conducting the program for sustainability for a period of time, and this is what I think that the company's message should be read as. In my viewpoint, I think with this particular program being spelled out, they will be in a position to attract most of the ESG funds, and that could possibly result into higher amount of valuation also for investors. So these are the two key takeaways I see. I think the third one, if I may add, I think they first time announced the technology platform for the marketing purpose. They built in about 14 different technologies within the platforms, including AI, ML, PL, and others. I think those technologies are likely to get marketed. Again, I think you can keep an eye as an investor on the valuation. These kind of technology platforms could easily command significantly large amount of valuation. So apart from existing business, the new businesses are, I think, quite value accretive and I think quite positive as far as I think the valuation appreciation is concerned going forward.
Right, right. Naveen, let's bring in your thoughts also going in. You know, the expectations were also running high going into this AGM. Stock was outperforming the Nifty, and the expectations were met regarding Yasser Al Rumayyan joining in from Aramco, or even the low-cost smartphone launch. But what are your thoughts on the green energy detailing, the capex guidance which is being given? It appears that a new capex cycle for RIL will start in the next 4 years, the 4 gigafactories. What are your thoughts on this new chapter which seem to be opening up for Reliance? Navi?
So if you look at, let's say, what Reliance has been doing and how things are panned out in the past for Reliance. So Reliance typically gets into very large projects, is able to execute those projects successfully, and thereafter those projects, once they start generating a lot of cash, they have to start looking for new growth engines for the company. Right, so that's the way the business actually has evolved for Reliance. So right now, if you look at Jio as their business, Jio is now one of the largest telecom players in India. It was the key venture in the last 5 years, and that is started to generate good amount of cash. There are some technological plays like 5G, which will happen in the next 1 to 2 years. But apart from that, I think from a business point of view, it's a fairly stable business now, generating good amount of cash. Of course, petroleum, petchem, altogether, O2C business is generating good amount of cash. So if you look at, as even Devin pointed out, the amount of EBITDA that the company is going to generate, it's an important aspect that how does company grow from the current levels, right? So if you look at the next wave of technology and next wave is in the green energy space, in the battery space, is in renewable space, right, which can generate an ROE more than 80%. So I think that's an area that we are looking to tap into, which appears to be quite promising. The capex which has been outlined, 60,000 crores plus another 15,000 crores, 95,000 crores, is a number which is digestible from the Reliance balance sheet perspective, as well as the kind of cash flow generation from the next 3 years perspective. So I would say that it's a very, very critical area that the company is getting into from an overall return on equity perspective. I think that's something which is very, very interesting to look at. So Net, the belief is that the ventures that the company is undertaking are ROE accretive and will result in good growth prospects and also a further re-rating potential for the company, considering that there are multiple plays which actually happen, more ESG funds coming into play, and also the growth trajectory persisting, so on and so forth. So that's the broad view that we are taking on Reliance at this point.
Right. Yash, let me come to you now. What was the standout factor from the AGM in your words? And all of that is okay. So that a new chapter is being opened and ESG fund will start also coming. But these projects are typically long gestation period projects. In the interim, do you see the stock go into a sideways kind of a consolidation? Because the rewards, the benefits of these plans, however ambitious they may sound, will take few years to pour in.
Is that the question to me?
Yash?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so
Yeah, please go on, yeah, Naveen.
yeah, so sorry. I agree with you that these projects are, of course, long gestation projects, and whenever there is a new capex cycle emerging, it takes time for the fruits of labor to actually come through, right? The benefits of this new chapter will take at least 3 to 4 years for the company to start seeing. Meanwhile, of course, the market was very, very clearly focused on what's happening in the Aramco deal and what possible valuations could come through and what's going to happen in the O2C business. I think there was a lot of excitement there. I think to some extent there is some bit of disappointment because it's still not clear the deal is fructified or not, and what are the contours of the deal, right? So that is something which I think the market took with a slight negative. Other than that, I feel that most things are on expected lines, and of course, some bit of profit booking has happened. This, of course, does not mean that the stock will become sideways because the capex plans that we are looking at from the next 2 3 years perspective are something which are very much manageable from the Reliance scheme of things, and also the existing growth engines are still delivering, right? So the stock might be, I would say, that sideways in the near term, which might be probably a couple of months later. But apart from that, I think the core business fundamentals look quite strong for now. So I believe the stock can do fairly well from here over the next, I would say, that 3 to 6 months kind of time.
Reiterating that RIL wrapped up the day close to the session's low, but as we flagged off, it was the expiry session as well as the fact that there had been a bit of a run-up in the stock prior to the AGM. 2153 is where it ended. But Yash, wanted to get in your views then as to how you're looking at the retail plans that were announced, clearly talking about massive expansion within the retail venture and how they've got over 12,000 stores as well within the retail space, and now they're targeting 1 crore merchant partners over the next 3 years. How are you looking at these ambitious plans for retail?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think last year, and I fully agree with Naveen's and Devein's viewpoints, the ESG fund and the value towards green energy. But speaking on the retail and the geo platforms and the tech telecom business, I think last year was mostly around the debt reduction bit, focusing on commerce, content and connectivity. But this year it is really about the value creation and ROI building up in terms of service, in giving that service simplicity, service innovation, and even service integration with a lot of partners like Google, Microsoft, announced last year. So I think the 3 takeaways that I have from this AGM is clearly there's a move towards the enterprises. The pivot to enterprises is crucial from Reliance Jio platforms per se. So we at IDC are also saying that by 2022 end, 90% of Asia Pacific enterprises will definitely fail to have a killer 5G use case. So the crucial thing here is that by 2025 also IDC predicts that the 60% of Asia Pacific enterprises in manufacturing, logistics, even mining operations will have some form of private 5G. So if Jio is planning to outsource some bit of the 5G stack to these Asia Pacific enterprises, it's a value accretive in a 3 to 5 year period. So we'll have to look out very closely on the acquisitions and partnerships the company is taking going forward. The second bit is around the customer experience improvement. We have seen a lot of investments across the Radices, the Haptic, NetMeds, Zivame, but there's a lot of integration that is required in the backend. We've also seen move towards the edge and the IoT and the satellite bit coming into India. There's also focus on getting the resilient operations with SD-WAN picking up. Plus, there's a platform play.
Okay, lots that has been discussed with respect to the RIL AGM, as we've been talking about over the last few years as well. There have been some very crucial announcements that have been made. But for now, let's just take a very quick break. Be right back. Welcome back. About an hour and a half of the RIL AGM concluded with quite a few breakthrough announcements that came in. Their focus on green energy, lots of plans with respect to the Jio new phone, and then of course you had Yasser Al Rumayyan as the RIL new board member, and that definitely, Ajay, piqued the interest of investors because it had been news that had been going about for quite a while.
You know, Awan, I'd like to draw everybody's attention toward a point which Aramco also talks about very largely in their RHP for their IPO. Aramco is putting a lot of incremental capex in green energy initiatives. So when Aramco is talking about not only picking stake in O2C business of Reliance, but also Aramco chief joining RIL board, there seem to be synergies much more than what meets the eye. Aramco is a traditionally legacy oil and gas business, but incrementally when they went for IPO, they talked hugely in their RHP about green energy and these kind of initiatives. RIL is also opening a new chapter for new energy businesses, chemicals, the new solar voltaic, hydrogen and whatnot. So there seem to be a lot of synergies there as well. I'd like to talk about this with our guest Devendra. What are your thoughts on Aramco chief joining over here as on the board, and both the companies also looking incrementally in the direction of the new energy world which we are talking about?
Yes, Ajay. I think my understanding is with Aramco, different possibilities could emerge. Maybe I think O2C company is already segregated out of the entire Reliance umbrella as a separate company. So one possibility could be, I think, some amount of investment could enter into O2C. The other possibility could be, I think, two of them put together, I think, could cross, I think, some kind of a joint venture together. Largely because of, I think, the fact that they are transitioning the entire business from a fossil fuel business to new material business. And in that particular transition, probably the valuation will not go to the companies which are processing fossil fuel. So quite possible that I think the joint venture type of a company that they may end up putting across, it could ultimately also result into higher amount of valuation plus attracting green funds, I think, into them. This is important. And those new materials which are coming out of the existing material blocks, I think that they have, they could possibly result into giving them a relatively, I think, higher amount of run rate as far as I think the growth in the global market is concerned. The announcement which is required to be understood in detail, of course, at one point of time, would be, I think, how far they are likely to sell some of these material blocks to global players, and in turn, I think, create the monetization out of this particular activity going forward. As far as I think the business is concerned, it requires, I think, a detailed understanding on this particular subject. But as I see it, and if I track this company correctly, I have read this that they have been successfully experimenting some of the pilot projects on the new material fronts, and they are actually, I think, found out, I think, the commercial success out of it, including the bio crude that they have actually, I think, worked upon. I think this is again, I think, bringing success. The coal-based methane, I think, projects, I think, which is basically high contents of ash into coal in India, I think they have started converting into fuel. And similarly, I think from the plastic waste also they have started converting them into the fuel. So the company is extremely well focused on the new material segment of development, and they want to sell this particular technology and the blocks to the other parts of the world, which could have a very, very large possibility. So I think we'll have to wait and see as to how exactly this thing could come out. But in my viewpoint, I think this is going to be a new chapter being written, transiting from the fossil fuel segment to new material segment, which would be a journey of 10 to 50 years. And quite possible by 2030, you might see, I think, a larger amount of picture emerging much before 2035. That's why I think zero carbon emission norm that they've set for themselves.
I'll let you go. Just one last question. Would you be reworking your numbers or price targets on Reliance, or you think it is early for that, but the stock may start factoring all of that in before the analyst community captures the new plans announced in their estimates?
So Ajay, I think my understanding on this particular subject is that I think Reliance is a 25% compounder year after year for next 10 years. Okay. Now, whichever way you want to look at, I think this company, whether you want to look at it from 6-month point of view, 1 year point of view, whatever, I think I am not an expert on that aspect. But if you see 25% compounding year after year for next 10 years, it could be even faster in subsequent period. But I think the point which I am trying to say is that the roadmap that they have put across has, I think, two main important criteria for investors and their evaluations. One important aspect is a consumer-facing business. They have already started contributing 50% of their EBITDA to the existing business. So this is important. And that business attracts a lot of money. Now, on the other side, you are putting in the green business, and that green business has got, I think, a larger amount of liking for the ESG funds. So they would probably start putting money into the company that because of that, I think you should get, I think, relatively higher valuations. And these new material blocks that we are talking about, they are basically, I think, likely to monetize it much faster, because as I was making a point, I could see that I think they have done pilots successfully. So I think the things are now on track. So all these three things put together, in my viewpoint, whether you look at EV to EBITDA or you look at any other ratio, I think probably are likely to see the valuation getting re-rated. It may happen now, it may happen over a period of time, I don't know. But 25% compounding is something which I look at it happening for next 10 years in Reliance.
Right, all right, Naveen, we'll let you go. Naveen, you are still here. Let's talk about the other exciting part of the AGM, which is the low-cost phone launch. And Mukesh Ambani says that this will not only be the low-cost smartphone for India, feature phone, but one of the lowest-cost smartphones in the world. The partnership with Google and Sundar Pichai also spoke about it. How do you see the potential of that? And can it also revive cash flows for Jio? Because Jio kind of was ebbing out on the growth front. If you purely look at the Jio performance last few quarters, it was slightly on the lower side of expectations.
So this is of course a very, very interesting, I would say that innovation that the company is doing. See, Indian market, of course, there is still a very, very large feature phone market which still exists in India, right? So that conversion is slowly taking place, right? So as far as Jio's market is concerned, it's primarily their addressable market is 4G, and they are not into 2G play at all. And then there is still a large 2G feature phone market still exists. So conversion of that is very, very, very important. What kind of ARPU it will bring and what kind of revenues it will bring is something which remains to be seen. But having pretty much everybody on the network and having them access the internet is a fairly important point of the overall telecom customer life cycle, right? So and Reliance is doing the right things in getting a play there. So it's difficult to envisage the profitability perspective of this innovation, but from a long-term customer lifecycle point of view, it's a very, very critical move that the company is taking. And I think once the phone is launched, what kind of features it has, how user-friendly it is, and all those things, I think then you'll be able to make a better call. But initially, at least, I would say that Mr. Sundar Pichai himself presenting on JioPhone and being present in the AGM does make a very strong case that the product is going to be extremely strong. So that's something which is going to be very, very interesting to watch out for, and it's a reasonably strong innovation that the company is backing into. So that's our view on the new smartphone that the company is launching.
Right. Right. All right. Let's also get in a very special guest joining us on the discussion is Debashish Mishra from Deloitte. He looks at the new energy space very closely and has worked with very interesting companies globally who are working in this direction, including the Middle East. Debashish, thank you so much for your time. I won't talk to you about the company, but of course the reference is that India's largest private sector energy company has announced a major wave of investments in the new energy space. Without talking about the company specifically, I want to understand from you what are the big trends which are taking shape globally in new energy space, be it solar voltaic, battery technology, hydrogen cell. All these areas is being spoken about by Mukesh Ambani, but I want to understand the potential you see in the space per se, irrespective of which company is pursuing it. But what are the big trends happening?
Thanks a lot, Ajay, for having me over. The global trend is clearly towards decarbonization, and you may see that most of the energy majors have announced decarbonization. The major countries are announcing decarbonization and moving towards net zero. There are companies which are announcing net zero by 2030. Nations are announcing net zero by 2050. And one of the major elements of decarbonization is renewable energy, which I believe is one of the elements that you were discussing. And you know that India has a major potential for solar-based generation. And in last 7 years, the renewable capacity in India has come from around 34 gigawatt to today around 96 gigawatt. And India has announced that by 2030 we will have 450 gigawatt of renewable capacity. And it's not only plain vanilla renewable which have been the trend so far. These will be storage-backed renewable which will be dispatchable. And I think in your channel you have discussed in the past also about green hydrogen, which is a which has major usage in refineries, in steel making, in fertilizer, in green ammonia. So overall, it's a very exciting space for India. And what India has realized is that almost 85-90% of the solar equipment was being imported. And given that since the pandemic has hit the world and the geopolitics and the supply chain disruption, India has taken it up in a big way to have manufacturing also, solar manufacturing also based in India, and which is the big trend which you have been discussing so far. I'll pause here. If there are any other questions, I'll take it up.
Just one more question from my side before my colleague would also like to scratch your brains around this emerging area. I want to understand globally how are firms in this area valued? What are the median valuations? What kind of multiples or on what metrics are these new energy companies valued in the first place by the funds and investors?
So Ajay, you asking me that?
Yeah, that's correct, Dave.
Yeah, so Ajay, overall, if you look at the trend, I'm not, I don't track the valuation per se, but in global investor community, ESG and sustainability has become one of the cornerstone of their investment philosophy. Anything which has a major carbon element is being dumped by funds after funds. So anything which is in the nature of new energy definitely gets more attention and more valuation. That's the global trend has been. And that's why if you look at even the super majors like Royal Dutch Shell and Total and others, Equinor, all those companies also which were traditionally hydrocarbon majors, they have a massive new energy plan, which is, in fact, in some of these countries, the regulators and investors are also forcing them to go towards net zero and clearly spell out their ESG and sustainability roadmap. So I would say that investors view this development very positively.
All right, stay with us, Debashish. Lots more to talk about. Yash, wanted to get in your perspective as well, and how you're looking at the company's ambitious plans, as we were talking about, with respect to this new solar energy, the battery technology, and they're saying that the main hub for this is going to continue to remain Jamnagar, and they have new energy operations over which they have slated out ambitious plans of about 75,000 crores in terms of investments.
Yeah, I think it has mostly to do with transitioning to a new energy core and then having those net effects in the company from the energy business into retail and tech sectors. So if I talk about the tech sector in general, I already spoke about the 4G to 5G transitioning and how it makes it less power consumptive industry as such, and then using most of the alternative power generation from EVs to solar powered equipment. So you also make the fleet that runs for you to maintain the towers more nimble and more lean. But the future, if I talk about the future, I think it has to be more open rather than closed from a geo platforms per se. But when you bake in that openness, you also bring in more change catalyst in environment. So most of the apps in the geo platforms will now transition from those closed and faster or slow moving parts to open and more faster change companies. So partnerships with Google and Microsoft will help those applications move faster to the cloud and help the data become more revenue generative for them in the future. So we've seen the likes of China Mobile, China Unicom, even that's a fairly closed ecosystem, but even they use Google's cloud ecosystem for their standalone 5G core. So the future actually belongs to a more open ecosystem rather than closed, and then the reason is clear. You need more premiumization and differentiation in your service offerings from a telco and retail offering per se, but you also need more sachetization of your offerings in those two geo platform space.
Right. Yash, Naveen, stay with us. My colleagues are also joining in, Mubina and Utkarsh. Mubina, let's come to you. We were talking about Yasser Al-Rumayyan, and finally he does replace Mr. Trivedi on the board. Talk to us about the gentleman, a bit of his background, and how he is a stalwart in the world of global energy, being Aramco head and Saudi Wealth Fund head, and now he's coming to Reliance. So it's kind of a, as Mukesh Ambani said, internationalization of Reliance board. Internationalization.
You know, Ajay, it's so interesting, the timing that, Yasir Al-Rumayani is actually joining Reliance's board. This is a gentleman, of course, whose basis is fossil fuel energy. He's heading Saudi Aramco. He's the chairman of Saudi Aramco. But apart from that being one of his key credentials, the reason why, of course, he's being inducted to the RIL board is the fact that he's a top advisor in the Royal Saudi Court. So he's an advisor to the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He's also, by the way, the governor of the $400 billion Saudi Wealth Fund. That's the public investment fund. He joined this, I think, back in 2015, and since then the size of this fund has more than doubled. In fact, 2.5x is the kind of increase we've seen in the size of this fund. But here's where it gets interesting. Mr. Al-Rumayani has done two key things that have been very different. Firstly, he's looking beyond Saudi. So it's more of a global perspective that he's looking at for his investments. And secondly, he's moving away from fossil fuel. So he's looking more towards renewable energies. In fact, he's widely noted as one of the most prominent, ESG investor advocates. And now, of course, you have this gentleman coming on the board of Reliance Industries. Of course, it's looked at as a precursor to that big deal between Aramco and Reliance. But I'd reckon, Ajay, that, with Saudi as well looking to weaning off its dependence on oil and, looking at blue hydrogen, looking at green hydrogen, Reliance Industries is now taking the very same steps. It's looking at these different kinds of, new energies, new materials, as we're calling it. And I would reckon that Mr. Al-Rumayani has a good amount of experience in precisely this, given the kind of investments that he has made via PIF, and also he's the chairman of Acme Power, which recently has increased its portfolio towards the renewable space. So I suppose there will be a little more than his contribution to the OTC business, and I suppose in due course we'll also be seeing Mr. Al-Rumayani doing his bit to pushing RIL's new energy business too.
That's correct, Mobina. Thanks for that. Of course, despite the fact that with each passing quarter, the retail business is actually improving its footprint across the country, and there was quite a lot of focus there. But because of the other big announcement, that portion of the business got a bit overshadowed today. But Utkarsh was keeping a close eye on Reliance Retail, and it's actually an unlocked trade as well. And Utkarsh, what were the highlights you paid attention to as far as the retail business is concerned at the AGM?
Exactly as you said, in midst of all the big bang announcements on green energy and Saudi Aramco, retail was more or less like that neglected child in the family. But important announcements really coming, and I was keeping a close watch. I think the most important is the ambition which Mukesh Ambani has stated out. The first one is the fact that they aim to become the top 10 retailers globally. The retail ambition of Reliance Retail is put forward by Mukesh Ambani, and he has said that the current business is in hyper growth at this point of time, and he sees a 3x growth in the next 3 to 5 years. The question is, what will drive this growth? What's important at this point of time, if you look at what he said, one is the physical growth, the growth in the physical brick and mortar stores. Now, due to the pandemic, that wouldn't have happened a lot, but despite that, what he told in the AGM is that almost 1,500 new stores were opened. But apart from that, it's the Geo Mart which is really the trick in the trade when it comes to Reliance Retail. He spoke about the fact that how 3x Kirana stores were added, 2x customers were added, and what he's speaking about is adding 1 crore merchant and adding them to the Geo Mart platform in the next 3 years. The tagline which he said is support Hamara customer aapka. So getting your roadside Kirana store connected to an app to your home is something which Geo Mart is looking at, and that's the ambition plan they have. Apart from that, we said that we will continue acquiring good businesses, so the M&A option will also remain open when it comes to Reliance Retail. And then is the Ajio platform, which has been doing really well when it comes to the fashion retail, and he said that of their apparel business, almost 25% is coming from the Ajio platform as well.
Thanks for that, Utkarsh. Yes, just taking a leaf out of what Utkarsh reminded us about is Mukesh Ambani clearly says that Reliance Retail will continue acquiring businesses. Yash, what are your thoughts on the retail end of their business, which is becoming larger, and M&A is also on their radar, be it startups or otherwise? and that will be, riding the backbone growth of Geo in a way, the technology backbone. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think Jio has already invested some bit of amounts in the startup ecosystem, namely the NetMeds, the Zivame, even the 5G ecosystem. If you see, they have the Radisys investment, but and on the AI side they have Haptech. But all these investments through the Jio Next platform that they have to groom those startup cultures and I think that will be the next stage of hitting the pinnacle. From the retail perspective, what we see that the customer experience is going to be paramount. So if you see the multi-channel convergence that he spoke about, you have access going from single channel to multi-channel, and then you have disparate customer experience and disparate brands going towards a unified customer experience and unified brand to have that super app experience. I think there's a long way to go there. I think all the enabling technologies such as the cloud, IoT, 5G, along with the fact that security becomes a good posture of in India, and then the AR, VR investments through Google Glass and all those investments. I think I spoke about the open innovation versus the closed innovation, and then how you can pivot yourself into an open ecosystem, and the rate of change of innovation also grows there. But the underlying equation remains very intact when it comes to data security. You have to find a right balance of open closed versus the rate of change for each of those players. You've seen Reliance Trends, you've seen Reliance Digital, the Hamleys, and the bunch of other partnerships that they carry now. Only thing to differentiate between them and the partnership will be to how quickly that they can bring up that super app customer experience, one brand, one customer experience across all their brands put together. So that will be the next growth charter for them, I believe. But on the wish list that we have is we wanted to see more partnerships on the 5G ecosystem, especially with NEC from Japan and Tech Mahindra in India. I think we would also wish for a rate-like structure or InvIT-like structure from their for their infrastructure business in telecom. And that gives a good decoupling from the service-led innovation and services going forward. So that's how you create a value going forward. So you need a clear differentiation as to what differentiates your infrastructure with the services.
Right. All right, gentlemen, Yash, Naveen, Deven, all three of you, thanks so much for joining us today and helping us understand the Big Bang announcements at the 44th AGM of Reliance Industries. And Avan, clearly, before we thank, it's important to remind our viewers that sometimes stock market is very short-sighted and myopic in its view, and the stock had run up. So some amount of announcements, when they came, the stock actually ended at day's low, but clearly not to take away the fact that this is a new chapter which is beginning in the entire journey of Reliance Industries. And it will be very interesting to track this over the course of next few years, the way Reliance is actually embracing green energy wave. With that, it's a wrap on the show from everybody who put the show together. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.